Okay, so now we turn from our good dead friend Tommy Hobbes to our good dead friend René Descartes, who was a French guy, wrote some stuff, died, and is of course still dead today. So firstly, the concise background. So you have a little history about stuff, so if you're ever on Jeopardy, you'll be able to answer some Descartes, give your answers in the form of a question. So Descartes was born March 31st, 1596. Oh, coincidentally, this is the deadline for the draft in honor of Descartes' birthday, in what was then known as La Haye, France, which is now known as Descartes, France. You can go there and look at the sign, I guess. There is, for real, you can check this on the Wikipedia, there is actually a LaBossiere, France, which I assume is named after me, for awesome things I will do someday. I assume it's like a time travel thing. I went back in time and saved the village from something. Probably myself. That's how I operate. He had his degree in law, but otherwise was a pretty decent fellow. And like any young, enterprising man back then, he joined armies to see the world, meet interesting people, and killed them. Now, what led him into his most famous work, Meditations on First Philosophy, was on November 10th, 1619, shut in for the winter, because armies wisely didn't fight back then because the black powder guns didn't work so great in the snow. He had 3 vivid dreams, and he interpreted this to be a mission from God, kind of like with the Blues Brothers. And I assume it's on Netflix somewhere if you want to see that movie. And so what he ended up doing was, based on that dream, he wrote his famous work, Meditations on First Philosophy. So how did this person meet their end? Unfortunately, it wasn't anything cool like fighting a dragon or, dying of awesomeness. In 1649, he got what he thought was his dream job. Back in this time period, if you were a philosopher, when you were interested in money and stuff, you try to get a job with royalty, and they would become a patron, pay lots of money to learn philosophy. And Descartes got what he thought was a dream job with Queen Christina of Sweden. Unfortunately, this ended up killing her. Why? She was one of those people who wanted to be up super early. So her classes were at 5 a.m., and of course Sweden is pretty cold. He caught pneumonia and died on February 11th, 1650. And as I mentioned, still dead today. So that teaches us 2 important lessons. 1, don't get up too early. 2, live someplace warm, or you will die. That's just science. Now, before his untimely death in Sweden, he wrote a lot of stuff. His famous works include Rules for the Direction of the Mind, Le Monde, translated as The World. He wrote the very long titled Discourse on the Method of Rightly Conducting One's Reason and Seeking Truth in the Sciences. Back then, really long titles were kind of in. It was shortened to Discourse on the Method, and even shortened more recently to Discourse. In 1641, his philosophical Trojan Force, his claim to fame, Meditations on First Philosophy, was published. In 1644, The Principles of Philosophy, and his final work, 1649, The Passions of the Soul, which sounds like it'd be a good movie, probably starring, I'm guessing, Matt Damon, Nicolas Cage, I don't know. I'm bad at casting. So what was his mission objective? Well, like many of the dead guys, well, when they were alive from this time, his motivation was this. Philosophy and science, he noted, had been practiced for quite some time, going way back to Thales. And unfortunately, this is an objection we often hear today, a criticism of philosophy, that despite all that time, not much has been accomplished. That everything is still in dispute and debate. And this is a common criticism of philosophy. There is nothing certain, everything is up for debate, discussion, there is no definitive truths. And his concern, sort of adding to that, was he wanted to ground the sciences on philosophy. He thinks in order to do science, it's got to have a firm foundation in philosophy. And so his motivation is, well, twofold. 1, everything is uncertain. That's bad just in general. Secondly, he wants a firm, solid foundation for the sciences. So his objective is to address that problem. which is to find certainty, build that firm foundation, and make the world safe for science. Now, in addition to his physical travels with armies, he also engaged in a mental journey, which is good because it's cheap and there are no passports required. And what he found was this. When Descartes was first Descarting, the schools were sort of trapped in dogmatism. People would learn, Aristotle's works. He was known as the philosopher. And people would also learn scholasticism. It was very dogmatic. And so he wanted to go on an inward journey to find the truth. So, unlike medieval thinkers who focused heavily on authority and quotes, they would typically turn to the authority of Aristotle, the religion, etc. He decided to work as a solitary thinker, a lone wolf, as it were, trying to find the truth. Now, this had some important implications, and some not so important ones. One is, of course, it kind of changed the method of philosophy. The idea was, as he saw it, anyone with sufficient, horsepower, mental horsepower, could go on an inward journey to discover the truth. So philosophy became more of a personal thing, as opposed to getting answers from official sources and authorities. One would find the truth within. Secondly, perhaps much less importantly, thanks to Descartes, in philosophy, you can write philosophy in the first person. It's like a first-person philosophy. You can say, I think, I believe. And I know that in other fields, they don't want you to do that, which is kind of sad. But philosophy, it is all about you. It's, so when you're writing your philosophy paper, you can say, I think that, I believe that, etc. You don't have to do that awkward, second or third or 10th person. So what are his goals? Well, three main goals. Goal one, find absolute certainty. Goal two, from that absolute certainty, build a universal science, which answers all questions about life, the universe, and everything. And thirdly, reconcile the science, a scientific, material, mechanical universe with religion, metaphysics, the soul, etc. So those are his three goals. Goal one, absolute certainty. Goal two, totally unified science. Goal three, reconciling, word failure, paling moment there. Reconciling the science with everything else. Now, we're still working on those projects today. So I guess one question would be, do we have absolute certainty now and stuff? No, sadly. So we're still working on that project. Some people just gave up and said, you can't have that. But we're still working on it. Two, are scientists still working on a totally unified science? Yeah, that's kind of the dream. Like in physics, they've had the totally unified theory, grand unified theory, and they're trying to find the one theory to rule them all, the theory that explains all of physics. And so Descartes' mission still continues. And of course, lastly, we still have that struggle, because science tells us we're neat monkeys that wear pants and talk. That's what science says. You're a monkey, you have pants, and words come out of your word porn. That's what we got. But of course, we also believe what? Are we just monkeys that wear pants? No, we're people. And the question is, what is it that makes us people? So we have to reconcile like our sciencey stuff, that we're just, meat, with our view that we are something special, that we have thoughts and feelings and so forth. And some people say, well, yeah, we have thoughts and feelings and we're all special, but it's all mechanical. And other people, of course, still want to believe in the soul. So we have those three projects ongoing. So how did Descartes try to make this happen? What was his methodology? Well, in addition to his work in philosophy, Descartes, of course, was also well known for his Cartesian coordinate system. If you suffered through geometry, as I suffered through it, you get the x, y coordinates, etc., and they're called, Cartesian, Cartesian coordinate system. Did a lot of math stuff. So it's hardly surprising that he would select mathematics as his model. Why? Well, I guess I can put it as a question. How confident are you that 1 plus 1 is 2 on a scale of 1 to 10? Where 10 being you're pretty confident and 1 being, 10. We're pretty sure that that's true. So mathematics has certainty, or we think it does. And so he liked that. Mathematics is certainty, and he wants to find certainty. So he's using a mathematical model to try to answer his questions. So, method, math. Secondly, intuition. Now this is something he stole, well, let us say borrowed, let us not speak ill of the dead, from thinkers like Plato and Aristotle who borrowed it from other people. But here's the idea. He believed, or seemed to believe, that there are what are known as self-evident truths. And if a truth is self-evident, how do you know it's true? Yeah, if it's self-evident, seeing it shows the truth, you see the truth somehow. Now, thinkers like Plato and Aristotle and Aquinas had this notion, that Descartes himself steals, the notion of this faculty of reason. Descartes calls it, as we'll see, the natural light, not the beer. Although, if you drink enough of that, that'll make you see stuff, different stuff. But the idea that we have this special faculty that sees the truth, the faculty of intuition. Now, his claim is, if you're thinking clearly and you have full understanding that a self-evident truth is one when you understand it, you simply see the truth. It is, as it says, to be circular, self-evident. Now, these truths are not derived from other truths. So you don't go and do a proof to establish a self-evident truth. You just see it. And self-evident truths are pretty popular in those days. In fact, it's worked into American political philosophy. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
So how do you validate a self-evident truth? Like, what grounds do you have to support it, especially in something like philosophy?
Excellent question. Now, the usual answer is not particularly satisfying, because what they'll say is they'll typically point to vague metaphors, like you will see the truth. But a fair question is, well, how do you, as you asked, how do you know that you're seeing the truth? And they talk about also metaphors like the light of natural reason shines upon it. So you see literally, we still use that terminology today. If you understand something, you are enlightened. Or even when we draw cartoons, if a cartoon character is an idea, you draw a light bulb. And so, to be perfectly honest, there is no definitive standards. Because what they say is, it's not something you can prove, so there's not like steps by definition, and they use metaphors like it's illuminated, it's enlightened, you see the truth. And for like Plato, it was kind of like a feeling. I mean, to use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like, how do you know you're in love? And the answer is you just have that thing going on. And it's kind of a similar deal. It's like you kind of fall in love with the claim. But the problem, as we'll see, is exactly the problem you raise, which is how do you tell if the truth is self-evident, or whether you just like really, going back to love, how do you know if you're really in love with someone, or if it's just not a momentary infatuation, or all that natural light that I was drinking, which is a good question. So the long and short of it is they have metaphors, they have descriptions, but they do not have a definitive thing that tells you if you're experiencing this, that is a self-evident truth. And that's one of the problems, exactly the problem we're into, is having a clear standard for doing it. Now, what Descartes claims, as we'll see in a bit, he claims that whatever he clearly and distinctly perceives is true. But then you just push the question back. What is it to clearly perceive it? What is to distinctly perceive it? So all we get is kind of like words. And one of the fatal problems has been exactly that. How do you know when it's really true and when it's just a strong feeling? And the answer is we don't. He was trying to find that. He thinks he got it. but it's pretty clear he didn't get that. But excellent question. Now, where do these self-evident truths come from? Well, for Descartes, he claims they're innate, they're built in, put there by God. And the way we get them is not by empirical experience. So self-evident truths, he thinks, we don't like see them, with our eyes. We perceive them with that thing I mentioned, that inner light. And again, it's a nice metaphor, the inner light, enlightenment, etc. But in terms of really giving an account of what that means, we haven't got a lot of it. Because if we did, we'd now know. We'd say, okay, this is how you tell. You have that experience, it's known to be true. So how does this fit into his method? Well, what he claims is this. There are certain self-evident truths, and we'll see what he thinks these are later, that you know them to be true. So their truth is self-evident. So he thinks that you can find certainty through this rational intuition. You just, true. What about other stuff? Well, the second part of it is deduction. Going back to week 1, we're looking at deductive logic. And what does a deductive argument promise us? Ice cream? Pizza? That it has popsicles in its basement? It doesn't. Don't trust it. Don't trust the argument. Well, it offers us certainty. A deductive argument that's valid promises us that if we put in true premises, we're guaranteed a true conclusion. So what he thinks we can do is, if we take deductive logic, and mathematics is deductive, and we can begin with our intuitions, and they're supposed to be certainly true, so we take our true intuitions, we put them into a deductive argument. We get a true conclusion. We take that conclusion, we put it into, we know that's true, we put it into another deductive argument, we get another conclusion. And we keep on, we basically get a truth factory. We keep putting truths into deductive arguments, and he thinks that we can derive deductively everything. So that's his plan. I mean, on paper, it sounds good.
So you're saying, basically, he wanted to use deductive reasoning to support his claim that everything can be found certain.
Yeah, because what he wanted to do is he wanted to, and that's kind of a challenge, how do you support the claim that everything is certain, but his view is that there's certain things he just sees as true, then you plug them into valid arguments, and you get more truth. But you do point to, the problem is, how do you know that these things actually...
So it keeps coming back to the intuition, basically, that's the foundation.
Yeah, because if this doesn't work, then you don't know if what you're putting into your arguments... Yeah, and also, if you want to be, as we'll see in a bit, there's a question of how do you know if deduction should be trusted? I mean, we think we can trust it, but a question is, how do we actually know that? Yeah, so if the self-evident truths, if we can't be sure of those, then the whole thing just, which is actually what happens, the whole thing just gets blown to pieces. And even to this day, philosophers raise this exact point. We need to know something is true to get things going. And some philosophers say, well, we don't really need that, we can just kind of assume it. Other people say, yeah, that's cheating. So, the work in which he lays this all out is his Meditations on First Philosophy. And he writes them out as if they took place over 6 days. But they're actually the result of about 10 years' work, putting them together. And it is his claim to fame, so sort of his primary work. Also, coincidentally enough, it is the subject of our paper. And so, without further ado, we'll turn to killing 2 Descartes with 1 stone. So what is the paper about? Well, Descartes. More specifically, here's the idea. The paper focuses on just meditation 1. There's 6, so it's 1/6 of it. And the thesis is this. The purpose of this paper is to summarize and critically evaluate Descartes' skeptical arguments. And the issue is, do his arguments justify the degree of doubt that he claimed? Now, the paper is, to organize it into like convenient pointy things, is a 4-part paper. in the core of the ancient tradition, things in 4 parts. There's an introduction, summary, argument, and conclusion. And when doing the paper, be sure to label the sections for the purposes, the very pragmatic purpose of the grading part. So I know like which part is which, so I can assign the appropriate pointage. Now, in terms of some mechanics, turning in the paper for the drafts, print a copy. Reason why is that way I can, mark it up. And I've been told I shouldn't use random papers anymore. They say that apparently they say that's psychologically, harmful, which is exactly. So I went to the office. I went to our office manager. Asked us, what do you need? I said I need more red pens. He always said that, but it makes people feel bad. I'm like, that's why I use them. I'm a terrible person. I will switch. I guess I will switch to maybe a pleasanter color. Like blood red. No. And with the drafts, you can do, like I said, you can do as many as you want, from 0 to as many as you can do. And with the drafts, I'll put comments on it and put in like a tentative score, and you can keep revising until either you are satisfied with your grade, or you get sick of the process, or time runs out. And people often ask, like, what if we don't do a draft? And the answer is, you don't want to. No. It's really nothing, because the final version of the paper is what is graded, so if you don't do a draft, it's like gambling. You're letting it all ride on that one chance. Now, if you're very confident about your ability, to write a good paper, it may be worth it. If you need a particular grade in the class to graduate, keep scholarships, fellowships, etc., then you want to do like at least a draft to at least get some feedback on it. And as a professional writer, I do lots and lots of drafts. In fact, like when I did my first book, I did so many drafts I began to hate my book. And people ask me, like, how do you know we don't have drafts? It's like when you start hating it, then you know you might have done enough. I don't mean like disliking me like a real deep hate. Like if it was a person, you'd have to choke it out. Even though I'm a decent person. Now the final version of the paper gets uploaded on Blackboard, and it gets, fair warning, it goes through Safe Assign, which is really good about spotting stuff. Now, I always do check. So people sometimes say, I got like a 40% on my plagiarism. What am I doing? It's like, probably not, because it doesn't distinguish between things that are properly quoted, things that are kind of similar. So if you get like a number, you don't need to panic. Maybe. Now, in order for me to grade it on Blackboard, you have to upload it as a Word file. And if you use like OpenOffice, just save it as Word, or you can just save it as PDF. Because otherwise, I'll just get a thing saying, let's get an icon, and it's easy to grade an icon. Icon is 0, essentially. So be sure to, I'll check the thing regularly. If I see that before the deadline that I can't read the paper, I'll delete it out and then send an email saying, please put a paper in that I can read. Grade discussion. Even though I have a clear rubric, as they say for the paper, grading a paper has a high degree of subjectivity. It's not like grading like a math problem, 1 + 1 is 2. And so if you believe your grade is too high, you can come in and discuss that. No. If you believe the grade is too low, you can come in and discuss that. The discussion of the grade is risk-free in the sense that unless someone breaks down and says, I admit it, I plagiarized, I confess. Unless someone does that, the grade can never get lower. So if you go in with like an 83, the worst that could happen is you depart, but it's still an 83. But to get the grade to go up, you need to have a reason within the paper. So if someone says, I need to graduate, or I need to keep my financial aid, or my parents promised me a Prius or a Tesla on graduation, that doesn't give me a reason to change grades. Unless your parents buy me a Tesla, which would be wrong. Especially on camera. I film evidence. See, unlike many politicians, I'm smart enough not to say anything that can get me arrested on camera. Which is what separates, people say, what separates philosophers from politicians? I'm like, probably that. Plagiarism. Plagiarism is bad. So the way to avoid it is, if you're using someone else's words, quote, cite. Or someone else's paper, best thing to do is avoid that. Now, Same sign is not infallible. There are things that you can't get everything, but it is really good. And typically each class I get 3 to 5 plagiarized paper every class, no matter what. And I always give the standard speech. It's better, what usually happens is people are near the end, it's like, oh crap, paper's due tomorrow. And people get desperate. But it's always better to just, say, okay, I've got 3 hours, and just slap that keyboard, put together words about Descartes, because if it's original, even if it's awful, you'll get at least some points. If it's plagiarized, at best, 0. And people say, do you negotiate about plagiarism? And I'm like, well, no. People know what they did, I know what they did, there's nothing to talk about. I don't take it personally, though, at all. Some of us are really angry about it, but I don't take it personally, not at all. Except when people plagiarize my papers. One of the funniest cases was someone was taking my intro class, and they needed, I think, like a 40 on the paper to pass, so they could have turned in like something really horrible. And they called me, and then they came to me and said, did I pass the course? I said, they asked me, like, how was the paper? I said, it was a great paper, one of the best I've read. Oh, and so I passed, and they said, I passed the course. I'm like, unfortunately, it was my paper. So they had turned in a paper, I don't know where they got it, but they turned in a paper I had written, which was a great paper. It was really good. Formatting, I'm not super obsessive about formatting, but the standard thing is, since it's turned electronically, double spacing doesn't cost anymore, it's easier to read. I guess the pro tips. When people grade the papers, they're supposed to, of course, grade the content, but if it's really annoying to read, that becomes, it's hard to feel good about the paper. So paragraphs are good, as opposed to a wall of text. Double spacing is good, because it makes it easier to read. And like normal fonts, like Times or Helvetica or Minion or Minion Pro. And one way to look at it is ask yourself, would I like to read about 70 of these in this format? If the answer is no, then change the format. Now for footnoting and endnoting, I'm not going to make you learn like a whole new system just for one class. Use whatever you use in normally your major. Chicago, APA, Hawaiian, I assume that's a style, or maybe a pizza. But whatever you use in your major. If you don't have one, if you don't have a major or don't use one in your major, then you can go with MLA, I guess, or you can just pick one. The most important thing is, do you have like footnotes or endnotes that properly cite any things you directly quote? If the answer is yes, excellent. If the answer is no, then not so excellent. You don't need a cover page, especially an electronic version. And you can include, if you normally include a works cited, that's fine. If you normally just do like endnote, footnotes that do that, that's fine as well. Okay, before pressing on to the next slide, anything about this slide that needs more slidey stuff? Okay, and also so the final version goes into Blackboard, so you can turn it in any time before the deadlines from almost anywhere that has the internet, which I assume is anywhere. Now the first part is super easy, the introduction. It's worth 5 points, should be 125 words or less, and what you need to have in there is the thesis. The purpose of this paper is, summarize Descartes' arguments and address whether they support the degree of skepticism or not. The summary statement is just saying what you're going to do in the summary. I will summarize Descartes' first meditation. Position statement. Oh, this is your position on the issue. And this can range from, a broad one like, it is my position that Descartes fails totally, or succeeds totally. Or you may have it broken down like, argument 1 works, but 2 fails, and 3 fails, or 1 succeeds, 2 fails, 3 succeeds. Whatever your position is. Either they all fail, none of them fail, or some fail. For your argument statement, you just briefly state how you're going to argue. You might say something like, I will be assessing the sense argument by using an argument from authority. I'll be considering both the dream argument, evil demon argument, using arguments by intuition, as well as an argument by analogy. And then lastly, some minimal background, which would be something like, Descartes was a guy, he wrote some stuff, he died, he's still dead. Or maybe something better than that. The idea is, and you can do all this, you can do it all in maybe even a single sentence. In this paper, I will summarize and critically evaluate Descartes' three arguments for skepticism is my position, his arguments fail. I will show this by using appeals to intuition argument by analogy. And Descartes was a guy who wrote some stuff and then died.
Do you mind if we flip the order a bit,
Yeah.
like starting with the background before you get into your thesis?
That's fine, as long as it's all in there. Yeah, so if, I mean, you can do the approach any way you want. Basically the 5 points are, I'll go through it, is it in there? If the answer is yeah, 5 of 5. And the main reason I did this was just so I could have 5 points. Because 4 just seemed, 5 seems like the right number to go with. Because and. Really, count by 5s. And that's why we have 10 numbers. 10 fingers, for real. That's how it works. If we had like 12 fingers, we'd have a base 12 system, probably. If we just had 1 finger, I guess math would be tough. But you can express your opinion of math if you didn't like it pretty easily with that 1 finger. Now the summary is a bit more challenging than the introduction. It is summarizing Descartes' first meditation. It's worth 45 points. 350 words is kind of like an absolute minimum. And in terms of like the word counting thing, one thing is, of course, Gordon rule class. You gotta like hit a certain number of words because of the word thing. But also, of course, one thing is that in order to actually clearly summarize something, it requires like a certain amount of words. I don't have an exact number in terms of like how much exactly is required to summarize the first meditation, but it's, it's a pretty, it's not super lengthy, but it is a fair amount of text, and it's fairly complicated, so you need to be able to have enough words to cover. To be a little clearer about it, I don't like dock off points by saying, oh, they're 5 words short, that'll cost them. Basically, it's a question of, does it get the job done? Is it adequate? And I use the analogy of a bridge. The idea basically is you can think of like the river is in this case, the summary. Like you got your objective is get across the river. And what you need to do, of course, is get all the way across the river. And so when people say, well, how long should it be? And I said, well, there's got to be a minimum, there's like the river, there's got to be a minimum amount. But depending on how you build your bridge, it may be more or less going across it. And the key question with a bridge is, does it get across the river, and is it adequately stable? Same with the paper. I would ask not what is the exact word count, but does it get the job done, and is it well constructed? So someone could go on, incredible length, like 5,000 words. It could be 5,000 words of awfulness. And someone could have a fairly short one, a few pages, and it could be brilliant and get everything done. So long and short is, you need a certain number of words to get it done, practically also Gordon rule, but the grade is not directly proportional to the words, because a lot of crap is still crap, and less good stuff is still good. So what's the objective? Well, in general terms, the goal of a summary is to clearly, concisely, accurately, and rather importantly, in your own words, summarize what's going on in the meditation. So the clarity part is, how well do you convey what's going on there? How, if a person is reading it and never read the meditations, would they understand what was going on? Concisely, of course, is important because a summary needs to be shorter than the original. That's kind of the point. Accuracy also important, because the idea is, if it's, not accurate, it's not really a summary, it's something else, like a straw man. And of course, to avoid, the plagiarism problem, in your own words. This is actually pretty challenging. People often think, oh, summarizing that's easy. I just say what was said. But doing it clearly, concisely, accurately in your own words is pretty challenging. Now, in terms of why this is useful, not just in philosophy, well, we are told that we live in the information age. And so in our jobs, in our personal lives, we get lots and lots of information. And we have to convey that to others quite often, like maybe part of your job, like doing a presentation, a sales presentation, or briefing somebody. And so summarizing is a useful skill in all those areas, because you have to be able to take something, present it to someone else clearly, cut it down to the essentials, make sure it's accurate, and in your own words, make it your own, so to speak. Now, what actually is going to be in there? Well, this takes us to the actual content. Now, there are, well, in terms of like what should be in the summary, here's what should be in there. I've included in the paper guide, in the notes, the full details. So kind of the safe but boring way to summarize is to take the outline from the notes and make sure that all the points in there are in the summary. But that's kind of boring because it's just, it may include stuff that may not really super need to be in there. So what's going on there? Well, here's what's going on. And this is what should be in the summary, but also our coverage of meditation 1. So again, covering killing 2 Descartes, 1 stone. Now, his motivation is this. Descartes realized, as eventually many of us do, that much of what he took to be true turned out to be false. And so everything we build on these false beliefs is doubtful. So he had 2 goals. Goal 1, get rid of all opinions he had accepted in order to build a new foundation that would have certainty in order to provide a base for the sciences. His method that he proposes is this. Now, one approach, of course, would be to go through every belief individually to try to disprove it or prove it. Now, what would be the problem with trying to prove or disprove every single belief? One thing would be how to do it. The other is time. And of course, it would be an impossible problem because every time you had a belief about your belief, you'd have a belief, you have to test that, and your belief about your belief testing, so it would never end. It would be an infinite regress. So, what he's doing is this. His method is going to have the following approach. First thing is kind of an extreme standard. For the purpose of his project, Meditation 1, anything he thinks that is not entirely certain, not entirely indubitable, he will reject as if it's false. Now, he's not doing this for everyday life. So he's not saying he's not going to believe stuff like about life, but for his method. He's going to take anything that can be doubted at all, it will be rejected. And the reason is not because he just wants to be absurd, but because he wants to find certainty. And the way to find certainty is to find something you can't doubt at all. So first part of his method is anything he can doubt, he will reject as false for the purposes of this project. Secondly, since undertaking an examination of all his beliefs would take, well, it'd be unfinishable, he's going to go after not every single belief, but he's going to go with the foundation for those beliefs. So he's going to go after, if the foundation of beliefs is not certain, then all the beliefs built upon that are uncertain and will be rejected for the purpose of the meditation. So to use an analogy, it's rather like the way they demolish buildings. One way, a slow way is individually pull out each brick, which will take too long. The other is to take out the structural support. Have you ever seen videos of people imploding a building? They go and take out the structures and boom, the whole thing collapses. And his project is literally like that. He considers the old views to be like a decrepit, unsafe building that's sort of swaying in the breeze. And so he's going to blow it up, bulldoze it away, and then build a new foundation in order to put the sciences on a firm footing. Now, before getting to his arguments about doubt, and there are 3 main ones: senses, dream problem, and the demon. Anything about his method or goals that needs to be stuff. His first argument is this: the senses. And this provides a foundation. So the foundation Descartes is going after is essentially empiricism. Because the empiricist says what? Whatever you know comes from your which are senses. And so essentially he's gunning for empiricism. The empiricists say what we know comes from our senses, and Descartes is going to try to show that you can't trust them. So any belief you have built on your senses, if you can doubt your senses, that takes them all down. They're all taken out. So he begins in his first attack with the senses themselves directly. Now, he says his senses have deceived him. And the way he supports this is by an argument by example. And he gives examples of various optical illusions. And then he concludes, and again, because his standard is whatever he can't trust perfectly, he's rejected. And so he says, well, my senses have deceived me sometime. I can't trust them 100%. And so, using sort of like an analogy, he says, whatever has deceived you, you shouldn't trust. So he says, the senses are out. But now Descartes is very methodical. What he's going to do is basically, we can go with our building analogy. He's going to like demolish the building, and he's trying to dig down until he finds, bedrock. So, and what he's going to do is, essentially dig until he finds it. He's going to be very careful about it, his procedure. So the senses, he says, are out. But then he pauses. He has a skeptical pause. He says, well, while the senses sometimes deceive us about particular things, like we are, driving along the road, it looks like there's water, but it's just a heat illusion. Or we stick a straw in water, it looks like it's bent, but it's not. He says, well, maybe I can be fooled about particular things, but general things. For example, he considers that I am here, in my case, in this classroom. Yeah, I can be deceived by particular things, but my general experiences I can trust. And so he pauses there. Because he says to deny such things would be madness, possibly space madness, if it occurred in space. Now then he gets into his dream problem, which is this. He has often thought that he was awake when he was asleep. Everyone's probably had that kind of dream. You dream like you're like awake and doing stuff, and then you realize you're not. And what he's essentially saying is maybe that's happening to him right now. Then he pauses again. He says, well, maybe I have a way to tell dreaming from being awake. And he says, things that happen in dreams are not as clear or distinct as what's happening now. There's all kinds of weird stuff happening in dreams, discontinuity, etc. So maybe he can tell. But then he keeps on digging. He says, well, in my sleep I've been deceived. And so I could still be being deceived now. Because even if we accept that we have ways of sort of telling, 5 minutes from now that could happen. And I could think everything is, oh, this is real. And then 5 minutes from now I could realize, oh, it's not real at all. So, since he can't be certain that he's not dreaming, he thinks he could be dreaming. So, drawn out badly. So what we have, so far is like here is, badly drawn, the building of old, philosophy, so it's all, broken up, etc. And his plan is, okay, I'm not going to take it apart brick by brick. I'm going to knock out the foundation, the crappy foundation is built on. So boom, that's the strategy. So the first thing that goes is the senses. Can't trust the individual senses, so he's hammering away the building. And so that kind of digs him down a bit. He says, well, okay, I can be fooled by optical illusions. And then he pauses. It's like he finds something, okay, maybe I found that foundation, I found the bedrock. Which is particular experiences, yeah, I can doubt about, so those will do. But my general experiences can be trusted. But then he sort of chips at that, and he realizes, oh, that was just a thin layer of, stone, but that breaks too. Because I could be, dreaming. And then he hits, and he says, well, maybe I can tell. I can tell when I'm dreaming and when I'm awake. But then he chips away at that a little more, and that breaks. But then he pauses again. He brings forth the painter analogy, which goes like this. Now, he says that maybe what we see in dreams are like paintings of mythological creatures. Things like unicorns, centaurs, sirens, satyrs. And he says something like a centaur, not real. But what a centaur is made up of is real stuff, namely, torso of a human, body of a horse, or like a griffin, lion and eagle combined together. And so maybe, he says, I may be wrong about particular combinations of things, but the stuff that makes them up has got to be real. And he says, well, even if, things like hands and heads and stuff are made up, surely the simplest parts, the colors, are real. So he keeps, digging deeper. So where does he seem to finally hit bottom? Well, namely this. He does note that anything that's like complicated or complex could be entirely, fictional, could be, pieced together. Because, once you accept that, like a centaur is, human plus horse, then we could accept that maybe like even the parts of the human are also just made up, pieces made up. But then we get down to like, well, then to use an analogy, to go with this painter analogy, to paint a centaur, you need at least the colors. So the color palettes, at least, those things are real. And other things like the, geometry and number and so forth, those are, whether you're, as he says, whether you're dreaming or awake, squares have 4 sides, 2 plus 3 is 5. And so he thinks, okay, finally hit a foundation. So all the complicated stuff, complex stuff, like astronomy and biology, that could all be made up, because maybe there are no planets, maybe there are no living creatures. But the simple stuff, mathematics, geometry, etc., you can't doubt that. Because even if you're dreaming of 4 centaurs, the centaurs aren't real, but 4 is still real. And so you can finally find something to trust, or so he thinks. Now at that point, it would seem that he's gone as deep as he can.
Can we back up just a second?
Sure.
I'm not hearing what his argument is for the painter analogy.
Oh, okay. What he's arguing is this. The question is, so how do I know whether what I'm experiencing in a dream, how do I know whether I'm dreaming or not? How do I tell what's real? And then he says, well, maybe in the dream, what I'm experiencing is like a painting, it's made up of stuff. So if you see a painting, if someone says, there are centaurs, and you say, really? Can you prove it? And they show you, to use a model, they show you a picture and say, look, centaur. Your first thought would probably be, they did what? Yeah, Photoshop. Took, especially if like the top looks like, say, Miley Cyrus, and the bottom looks like, Secretary. They were photoshopping. So a modern version of painting would be like the Photoshop thing. And he'd say, no, that whole thing isn't real, but yeah, I'm pretty sure Miley Cyrus is real and horses are real. But then if you really started doubting, you'd say, well, maybe the whole thing is made up. Maybe there really is no Miley Cyrus. You never, probably never, I never met her, probably never met her. Maybe that is a fake as well. So you might think, okay, all of the stuff, when I see that Photoshop of a centaur, of a Miley centaur Cyrus, then how do I know like what in that image is real? And of course, pretty sure that the Miley centaur is not real. And you think, oh, there are horses in Miley Cyrus, but maybe not. Maybe they're not really.
So is this linked to point B, the dream problem of not being able to distinguish whether or not you're awake at all?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was trying to say, if I'm in a dream, what can I know, what do I know is real? What can I know? What is all just like make-believe in my dream and what is actually real? And then he says, well, okay, all this stuff could be in my dream. I could be dreaming all this stuff. But he says, but then surely the colors have to be, because if I'm dreaming of a color, surely the color is going to be real. And then he considers, well, math would be something we can be certain about. So I don't know if biology is correct, because I don't know if there actually are, human bodies with this kind of, I could be dreaming all this stuff up. But the number, I know math is correct. So if I dream of a square, I don't know if the squares were like, we'll take like, this table. I can't, he says, there's no way I can tell whether I'm dreaming or not. But, so what can I know, even within the dream? Well, I know that this has got 4 sides, because it's a rectangle. And I know that if I have 3 desks, that's more than 1 desk, but less than 4. So he's kind of thinking, even if this was a dream, what can I know for sure? And so he seems to hit a foundation, namely math, in short. 2 plus 3 is 5. Whether you're dreaming or awake, that's true. So if I have two desks and add 3 desks, I get 5 desks, whether I'm dreaming or not. If I count, if I look at the sides of the rectangle, it's got 4 sides, whether it's a dream tangle or not. So it seems that he's achieved, the goal. Math saves the day. Never thought I'd say that. Gravity is awful. Now at this point it seemed that he's gotten to, a foundation. But, no, it gets worse. Now, he brings in God and the demon. Well, it sometimes translates the genius, but I prefer demon. It sounds like a cooler battle. Descartes versus the demon. Now, Descartes believed, he was Catholic, and so he has to be kind of careful. He can't come out and say atheist stuff, because I got Hobbes in trouble. Back in this time period, you could be nailed to something or set on fire for believing the wrong stuff, or actually saying the wrong stuff. So he believes in God, but how does he know that God has not made it so that there is no earth, there is no heaven, there is no extended body, there's no magnitude, no place, but he perceives all this stuff as if it was real when it's not. In other words, how does he know that God just doesn't create it all in his mind? That, here's Descartes' mind, it's all playing out in his mind, but there's nothing outside. Or to use, a modern, actually it's kind of old now, 17 years ago, The Matrix. How does he know he's not in the Matrix? Now he does consider a way out, because God is supposed to be good. And it would seem that a good being would not deceive him. But he's got an argument against that. How so? Well, here's why. He does accept that he's deceived at least some of the time. So, if some deceit is consistent with God being good, then deceit all the time would seem to be consistent with God being good. I mean, to use a crappy analogy, if someone lies to you sometime, you have a reason to think maybe they lie to you all the time. So Descartes considers, that maybe all the things he's experiencing could be the result of, it's all in his head, put there by God. Now, that would be pretty bad, but yet, it gets worse. So how does it get worse? Well, Descartes says, now he's in free fall, there could be not God, because he doesn't want to attribute anything, because he doesn't want to say that God is like deceiving him, because that would be like blasphemy and stuff. So he says, oh, he imagines that it's not God, but there is an evil demon. Or Batman.
Look like a bat.
Who is zapping this stuff into him. And again, going back to the Matrix thing, Descartes like a person in the Matrix, and the demon would be like the Matrix servers. I assume they were probably running Windows. I guess that if I was a tyrannical, evil, mechanical overlord, that's what I would run. And if I was on an evil, tyrannical overlord on a budget, I'd go with Linux, I suppose. Running on little Raspberry Pi, computers. Or the new one. There's a new one called, I think it's called The Chip. It's a $9 computer. For real. Well, it's not like it's like an iPad, but it's the basic parts. USB, Bluetooth, RAM, processor, etc.
Oh my God.
Yeah, $9. I'm gonna buy like a stack of them just because I can. Just put them all together. Put a computer on my dog. There you go. You're now a computer dog.
Robot dog.
Yeah, Robo Dog. Oh, Dynamite from Blue Falcon. Google it. Kind of like a Batman kind of thing.
Yeah.
The Falcon. Not to be confused with the Falcon, but the Blue Falcon.
Yeah.
Different type of thing. Similar powers though. You fly around. Oh, actually like a hover car.
Yeah.
In a robot dog. But anyways, nothing to do with this.
Toy on subject.
So the demon, of course, makes it super awful. How so? Well, once he had math, he would see in the Descartes hit a foundation. He could build everything up from math. But he brings in the demon. And the demon can deceive him about anything, even mathematics, even about the size of a square. Now, a good question would be, well, how could that occur? How could you be wrong about the number of sides something has? How could you be wrong about math? Well, here's how that could happen. Now, to count sides seems easy. But of course, we have to remember when we're counting. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, have you ever seen the movie, it's an old movie, but Memento? There's a guy, the plot thing is there's a guy whose wife was like murdered. He's trying to find the killer. And the thing in the movie is that his memory is fine up until that point. But after that, he has no long-term memory anymore. So he forgets everything that happened. So what he does is he like tattoos information on himself and leaves himself clues. So imagine that you had no short-term memory at all when you were trying to count something. You could be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so if the demon messed with your memory, you wouldn't be able to count properly. Now we think it's fine, but of course we could be being deceived about that. Because it takes steps the demon can mess with. Similarly, if we're doing math, it seems true, but a question would be is how do we prove that that's true? And if we go to prove it, and we go through steps, and people have tried to do that. Bertrand Russell and Albert North Whitehead wrote a work called in which they try to prove all of math, beginning with 1 + 1 is 2. Now, if you prove it through steps, you have to believe that the steps are correct. I mean, to use an analogy, imagine you wonder whether you trust somebody or not, and you believe you've checked their ID, but it's like, imagine it's like in Avengers or Captain America movie or something, and the person is like, or like Doctor Who, someone's got they've got like mental powers. So they show you like a piece of paper, they say, oh, where's your authorization? And the person shows you a piece of paper, but they have psychic powers, so you think you're seeing an authorization. And you check and you say, oh, it's A-okay. Or they just implant a memory that you already checked their papers. Or like the Star Wars thing, these are not the droids you were looking for. And the person think, oh, these aren't the droids I'm looking for, but they're totally wrong about that. So the evil demon, think of like a super bad, Jedi, mind control type of thing. And so we can believe all this stuff to be true, but we're being deceived. We think it's true, we think we've proven it, but we haven't. So, total free fall. Now, at this point, you might say, well, we're screwed. Meditation 1 ends, You know, it's like all the heroes in the movie die, you know, it's over. But Descartes, of course, he's got to have something. And this is what he says. Even when he's in this free fall, he claims, perhaps incorrectly, that he still has the power to suspend judgment, to avoid giving credence to false things, and so he can simply refuse to believe. And what he's going to try to do, and we'll see this in meditation too, is he's going to try to find the thing that ends the free fall. And what he claims is this, to give a spoiler. He claims, I think, I am, that's always true. So that becomes his foundation, the undoubtable claim. Or so he claims. So in the summary, the objective is to clearly, concisely, accurately, in your own words, summarize that stuff. And again, the way to sort of check it is, the stuff that's in the outline is the stuff that should be in there. And the outline is like super detailed, so the idea is not just to like include every point. That's a safe way to do it. The riskier, but more, you know, I guess more interesting approach is to try to cover everything and as little as possible. That's kind of the ultimate challenge of, you know, summarizing, to say the most with the least. Now, before going to the argument part, which is probably the toughest part, anything about the summary part that needs more summary stuff? I don't think anybody actually ever uses these things. I used them once.
What is it?
It's a camera that connects to the projector, so I could like project
Big.
there's a really big me staring at you like Big Brother. Ooh, pay no attention to the person beside the screen. Now, in terms of the grading of this, basically breaks down by the pointage. And Article 1, start in the middle, gets the job done. It's got all the stuff in there. It's competent, it's not bad, it's not good, it's adequate. To use a food analogy, it's like a basic ham sandwich, or for those who don't eat meat, it's like your basic salad. Not good, not bad, adequate. Now going into the good zone, a good summary, it's mostly a matter of, you know, clarity, because an adequate summary has got all the points in there, it's not missing the points. So a good summary doesn't have like more points, an excellent summary doesn't have like more, well, to be clear, that makes it ambiguous. An adequate summary has all the required information. A good summary doesn't have like more, but it's put together better. Again, going with the food analogy, and this is like a ham sandwich, you know, it's got ham and sandwich in it, and a good meal doesn't have like more meal necessarily, it's put together, it's cooked better. So this would be, you know, imagine that you've got the same ingredients and you have, you know, cooks working on it. This would be, okay, the person didn't burn it, it's edible. You know, they made the grilled cheese sandwich, it's not on fire. A good one is like good cooking, perhaps, you know, the same basic ingredients, but put together well. Very clear, very well organized, conveys the information very effectively. An excellent one, of course, is, again, like an awesome, you know, meal. It's got all the stuff that's needed, it's put together extremely well. Now, the poor stuff's actually easier to define. A poor summary or a failing one way to do that is just enough stuff missing. It'd be like you order a ham sandwich and you just have bread. No ham. Or it's put together very badly. You get a ham sandwich, but the ham's like on top, and it's, you know, just, it's bread and some ham thrown in a bag. That's your ham sandwich. And a failing one, of course, ranges from like nothing to just stuff badly put together. So in terms of the grading, again, it's based on how accurate, clear, concise, and how much in your own words it is. And the degree it does that, heads up this way. The degree it doesn't, heads down that way. Now the argument part is probably the toughest. 45 points. Take at least 500 plus words to do. And the beginning is pretty easy. You start with your position statement, which is, the issue is, do is the three arguments, the senses, the dream, you know, the demon argument, do they do what he claims? And upon, you know, looking at the arguments, do you say, well, yes, Descartes has established that I should have my senses, and this all could be a dream, that an evil demon could be messing with me. And the options are basically yes to all three, no to all three, or some combination. So if you think that none of them work, you'd say, I believe that all of Descartes' arguments fail. Or you think they all work, they all work. Or you think that some work and some don't. Just state that. That's the easy part. Now the tough part is doing the actual arguing. Now, again, I've broken it down to, like, for the purpose of organizing the paper, to 3 arguments: sense, dream, demon. So the first one, the sense argument. Now, suppose you think that Descartes, it does succeed, it works. What are some approaches you could take? Now, you're not required to take these. I mean, you're required to argue, assess each of the 3 arguments, but here are some hints to get you started. One approach is to look at deceptive senses and bring in another argument by example. Descartes supports his argument, or makes his argument by giving examples of deception. And so you could say, Descartes seems to be right. Here are more examples of deception. And there's bazillions of them where our senses deceive us. You could also use an argument by analogy. You might say, for example, imagine you have a friend who deceives you a lot, lies to you a lot. Should you trust them? Well, no. By analogy, if your senses deceive you quite a bit, you shouldn't trust them. So if you agree with him, you'd say, I find Descartes' argument successful, and then argue as to why the reader should accept that. Now suppose you think Descartes doesn't succeed in this argument. Well, one hint is this. You could argue using standards of critical thinking, namely that we have various ways of determining whether, Plato argued, ways of determining whether our senses are working properly or not. So you could argue that in order to be aware that we're deceived, we need to know that we've been deceived. So you could say, sort of paradoxically, in order for Descartes to make his argument that we've been deceived, we have to know we've been deceived. But if we know we've been deceived, then we have a way of telling when we're deceived and when we're not. So his argument, you might argue, fails. In case you were wondering, there is actually no right answer. You can argue effectively either way. With the sense argument, dream argument, second one. Argue the sense one. Now, the dream argument basically is this. The gist of it is, I can't tell whether I'm dreaming or awake because I have no definitive standard or standards where I could say, if this is happening, I'm dreaming. If this is happening, I know I'm awake. Now, if you think that he's right, one approach is to use an intuition argument, which we looked at back, previously, and you could tell your own. You can either borrow a story like The Matrix or Inception, or create your own story, and then show how that, like a dream scenario, how we would not be able to tell. Another approach would be to look at the standards and consider, well, Descartes' general argument is, we have no standards by which to tell. And you could say, you could consider maybe some standards, like, for example, one thing they often say is the pinch thing. They say, pinch me, see if I'm dreaming. But of course that doesn't work. Why? Yeah, you could be dreaming that you're being pinched. Or like in the movie Inception, each of the characters had like a little device, like a little token thing, and DiCaprio's is one you'd spin the top. And the way he told was if it stopped spinning, he believed he was in the real world.
Yeah.
And of course, at the end of the movie, it's still you just keeps on spinning and spinning.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's not. Of course, the obvious problem with that is, the reason why that doesn't work is, you can dream that the top just doesn't, it just stops going. And that would work in a dream too. The fact that the top, stops spinning, you'd say, well, yeah, it stops spinning. I could be totally dreaming that right now. And you have no reason to think that would be a definitive way of testing, which is kind of they had to do it in the movie to make the point. But the reason why they couldn't find anything that would definitely work is because you could argue there is nothing that would work. Now, if you think that he fails, the challenge is coming up with that, that token. What is it in a dream that would definitively tell you that you are dreaming, or definitively tell you that you are awake? And usual things include things like coherent, consistency, etc. And you can even argue something like, well, we may not be able to be sure that we're awake, as Descartes says, but there clearly are distinctions between what we call dreaming and what we consider awake. And so we can tell between those. You know, again, going to clarity, coherence, etc. Last thing, the God/demon argument. Now, if you agree that he succeeds, that we have no way of knowing, well, basically the thing to do is you could argue like how it's similar to the dream one. We have no way of telling. What standard would we use? You could use like the example I gave of memory. If the demon messes with our memory, then we have no way of being sure about anything. And of course, there's also the classic problem of evil, which could be an interesting approach, or not. Now, if you think that he fails, there are a couple ways to do it. One option might be is you consider kind of the odds. You know, which is more likely that there is a demon or there is not. There's also kind of the ironic approach that Descartes' goal is, of course, he doesn't want to end up a skeptic who doesn't believe anything. He wants to achieve certainty. So one way you could argue is you could say he fails by succeeding too well, because by attempting to create something that's a skeptical doubt, he creates an unbeatable monster that we can never. His goal again is not to be a skeptic, but to disprove skepticism. And you could argue that, ironically, he has succeeded himself into failure. It's just too tough to beat, and so he fails by succeeding too well.
So you're expecting us to address all three of these arguments, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So you need to have a position on each one of the three: sense, dream, demon, and an argument either against Descartes or for Descartes for each. And the very last thing in the paper is in terms of grading the argument, it said there is no right answer. That's why I picked. You can pick either side because there is no right answer. Well, there is a right answer, but I don't know what it is. So I don't know whether it's right or not. But you go with what you think is best. In terms of the grading, it's assessed basically not on did you get the right answer, but how well you argue for it. Are your argument, is it clear, well written, relevant, and are the arguments good? Do they logically support your conclusion, and are the premises plausible? Now, the final thing with the paper is the conclusion. This one is even easier than the introduction. And what you can do is this. Take your introduction, click, copy, click, paste, and just change from the future tense, I will argue, I will summarize, to the past tense. I argue that, I summarize that, and in place of the background, which you already gave, you'd have some final closing remark, something like, despite Descartes' inability to prove things with certainty, it gave rise to several successful movies, including The Matrix and Inception, or whatever. And that is the paper. Before ending for today, anything about the paper that needs more paper stuff?